everyone here, including the public gallery, to turn off the mobile phones. Members are reminded of the long-standing parliamentary practice to the effect that they should not comment on, criticise or make charges against a person outside the Houses or an official either by name or in such a way as to make him or her identifiable. This meeting has been convened to consider the further revised estimate for Vote 29, Communications, Climate Action and Environment, which was referred by order of the Dáil on the 20th of February 2019 to this committee. I would like to welcome Minister Richard Bruton and his officials to this meeting. I would like to thank the officials in the department for providing us with the briefing material which has been circulated to members of the committee. I would like to inform the Minister that the committee has agreed to proceed programme by programme. At the outset of the consideration of each programme, we will ask the Minister to give a high-level overview of the programme, including the pressures likely to impact on the Department's performance and related expenditure in relation to each programme 2019. The members will then be invited to put their questions in relation to a particular subhead within the programme. I would like to refer to the briefing document prepared by the Department to guide our consideration of the revised estimates. As a courtesy, I would like to excuse for the commencement of the meeting Deputy Naughton, Deputy Lawless and Deputy Eamon Ryan. They are taking a meeting with the Chief Executive of Facebook and will join us later. So we will commence with Programme A on communications, and this is in the briefing document between pages 12 to 17. I would like the Minister to make a statement.
Okay, well, thanks very much. I suppose before I say anything, I'd just like to thank the committee for the huge amount of work that you put into the work on the Citizens' Assembly and the report that you've published recently on climate action. I know it took a lot of work, and it was, I believe it's the most important issue facing our generation, and just to express appreciation for the work, and I hope that I will be able to do justice to the work you've done in our own action plan, which is under development. In terms of my own department, first of all, this is the first time I've come to present estimates and thank the committee for their hearing. The total estimate is 665 million. 288 of that is capital. That's across all of the briefs. And I suppose it covers communications, climate action and environment. I suppose specifically on communication, I suppose the huge challenge here is to make sure that the enormous transformation that digital technology is having on our world, that we can seek to ensure that people in Ireland can avail of the opportunities. And as you will see in the estimate, there are a number of areas where we make provision. One is on the capital side, where there is a tentative allocation of 75 million for the proposed state-led intervention, the National Broadband Plan intervention area. I think the committee will be familiar with what has happened in this area. Since 2016, the number of people with high-speed broadband has increased from about 50% to 74%, but there remains a figure around just under a quarter for whom the commercial market is not going to deliver high-speed broadband to the standard that has been set out in the specification made at the start of this process. So that issue is one that I am at an advanced point in terms of the due diligence that's being undertaken between my own department and the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform, and I hope, as has been indicated by the Taoiseach, that I'll be in a position to bring a recommendation to Government very soon. The second area I suppose to draw your attention to here is the money that's allocated to trading online vouchers and the money that's allocated to providing digital skills for citizens. I think these are both important schemes in their own right, in that they help to ensure that people have the opportunity to participate in the impact that digital technology can have, either on their business in the case of the trading online voucher, or on their lives in the case of citizens who haven't had experience of using digital technology. The other two points that may be worth drawing your attention to is the work of the Digital Hub Development Agency and the National Digital Research Centre. And the other significant area is the National Cybersecurity Centre, which, as deputies probably know, this has been significantly expanded in the last number of years, in the last 2 years specifically, is taking on new roles in terms of responding to incidents, has been found to be very effective in the way it responds to incidents. It is going further under EU directives to now have a role in relation to essential services, where essential services will have to report on a quarterly basis to the adequacy of their preparation to deal with cybersecurity. And the final point is that there is currently underway a consultation on a new cybersecurity strategy to be developed over the coming months. So that, I think, deals with the top lines in communications.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy Dooley.
Thanks very much, Chairman, and just to welcome the Minister and thank him for his comments to the wider committee for the work done on the climate change piece. Just a couple of issues, I suppose. The first would be just to look at the National Broadband Plan. You'll have had an opportunity in your time now in office, I suppose, to look at where the situation now rests. And when you maybe look back as to how we've gotten to the position that we're in, have you any concerns about the tendering process, the competitive dialogue process that was entered into, and in particular the decision that was taken by the department at the time? I would carefully suggest was taken in good faith based on the recommendations to go down the gap funding model. There were, I think it was KPMG or perhaps PwC that did a report at the time in relation to the ownership model that would best give the state best value for money. And at the time, the gap funding model was chosen in light of the fact that there were two main players in the state that had very considerable assets deployed from a broadband perspective, and that their existence in the process effectively ensured best value for money. Well, we know over time that both of those companies pulled out, and it could be contended that the state should have stalled the horses at that stage, and should have regrouped and taken stock of the situation to ensure that they weren't left with one pretty small operator being left as the only potential bidder in the race. So I suppose what I'm trying to get at here, in perhaps a convoluted way, Minister, is, having looked back, have you any concerns that perhaps the best path wasn't chosen or greater care wasn't taken at an earlier stage to ensure that the state got best value for money and that it wasn't left in a situation where there was just one bidder in the race?
Minister.
Thanks very much indeed. Firstly, I think the gap funding model was chosen for good reason. The idea was that the state didn't have a preconceived notion of how this ambition would best be served. It wanted to test the market. It also wanted to ensure that whatever technology was developed and put in place, that there would be an incentive for whoever was operating it to keep it future-proofed throughout its life. I suppose the backdrop to this is obviously a number of years ago, Air was sold off, so we don't own the vast majority of the network. The inevitable feature of this intervention area is that it has to graft itself upon an existing network that's in private sector ownership. Now, I'm not going to pretend that I have read every document around that period when that decision was being taken, but it was taken, I believe, on the right basis, that the best way to develop this was to stimulate the private sector to come up with a solution that grafted onto existing assets that were not in public ownership. And that was the best option. That state ownership in itself didn't confer benefits, since it would not be, it would be a piece of a much wider jigsaw. So that was the backdrop. I think it was I've no reason to suggest that wasn't the right decision. I can see absolutely the reason for it. On your second question about when two of the bidders decided not to proceed, a decision was taken that nonetheless we would continue with the competitive dialogue. That was taken on the basis, I suppose, that there was an understanding in the department of what was the parameters of a successful bid to deliver the sort of solution that was emerging. And it was interesting that all of the solutions that were emerging as being the most cost-effective were fibre to the home. And there was a confidence that with proper oversight of the evolution of the contract which was undertaken, that this would still represent a proper way to finalise a cost of delivering this. The department geared up very substantially its resource to ensure that it could investigate in enormous detail the costs of different elements of a potential rollout. So the department has a high level of confidence in the various cost estimates that have been put in place, from having, if you like, shadowing a lot of the cost estimation process. So clearly, you could argue, and many would argue, that it would have been better if two remained in the race, but given that two or more didn't stay in the race, the department took the necessary steps to ensure that this evolution would be invigilated to a point where there would be confidence in what was being proposed. Obviously, it's up to government to decide whether the costs that will now have been identified with the various riders and contract terms and qualifications and so on, whether that represents a decision that they want to go along with. And I hope to be in a position to bring a recommendation to government very shortly.
But isn't there a serious issue, Minister, and I track most of what you say, and the gap funding model was the right decision with the information that was available at the time. But isn't it clear that as the information changed, or the circumstances changed, the context changed dramatically when both Ciro and Ayr pulled out, that there should have been a review at that stage? Now, the government resisted all efforts by the opposition to have a review at that stage, because I think rightly it was identified on this side of the House that you were leaving yourself open to one bidder effectively holding you over a barrel, which now appears to have happened, if we're to believe the rather well-informed leaks that we read rather frequently, that would now suggest that the estimated cost has gone from £500 million to somewhere close to £3 billion. So isn't it clear that the failure, if you want, of government was not to intervene when the context changed, when the fundamentals changed significantly? Isn't it also the case that we're now left in a situation where everyone's backs are to the wall? There's a requirement to roll out broadband. People are demanding it. We're in the throes of an election, and people expect it to be delivered. And we're no closer to doing that, because we don't know the capacity of the remaining bidder or its ability to deliver, whilst it's said by some that no matter who would have won it, it's the same set of subcontractors would be doing the work, and it's what your department says on an ongoing basis. But isn't it the case that the success or failure of the contractor will be in the project management of such a large-scale project across wide geography and across rather varying and difficult terrain? So the skill sets required are not just about splicing or laying fibre or tracking fibre along poles. Now, I know that Taoiseach has an issue. He believes that fibre goes in the ground, but we'll get over that. It principally goes along poles, as you well know. But isn't it the case that the real important component of the bidder for this project is the project management piece? And I've searched fairly extensively, and I don't see the project management capability of Granahan McCourt, a private finance company based out of Boston, which has been very good at managing investment, but I would argue that that's buying and selling. It's not about delivering projects like this. So over and above the mistakes which get made, and I accept that, or the failure of the government to intervene when it should have. But now the question that's being asked, I think, is, do we spend $3 billion, and do we bet the future of the people who are waiting for the 542,000 premises and homes who are waiting for broadband? Do we bet their future on a private finance company out of Boston, in the hope that they'll somehow develop the project management skills to make such a large-scale project viable? Or are we pushing a decision down the road after the signature of a contract that finds ourselves 2, perhaps 3 years into it, having to force some of the covenants in a contract for failure to deliver? Wouldn't that be an unmitigated disaster for the people who are still waiting for it, waiting for broadband?
First of all, I do not accept that mistakes were made in the way this has been conducted. I think it's worth saying, just to put this in context, like in urban areas, there's been well over $3 billion invested in providing high-speed broadband to urban communities, and all of the contractors are now committing to have fibre to the home in urban areas. So, the decision of government in the programme for government to adopt an ambition of having high-speed broadband available to every home, so no one would be left behind, was the right decision. In the event, all of the bidders who came in proposed that fibre to the home was the most cost-effective way of delivering it. The second thing that's worth saying is that at the point at which some of the contractors withdrew, the interrogation of what was being offered was well underway. All 3 bidders had brought forward proposals in the competitive dialogue. So there was a very strong understanding of, by the department, of the parameters of the programme and the likely cost, the technology options, and so on. And indeed, AIR continued to the penultimate stage, a very late stage. So there were 2 bidders who submitted proposals, including their assessment of the subsidy required. So this wasn't, if you like, at the point in which AIR withdrew, this wasn't at a very early stage, leaving, if you like, one bidder with no benchmark against which their bid could be judged. So the department had been involved in the process over a long period, and one of the bidders had gone a very significant distance down the road. In terms of skills and project management to roll this out, like, I can assure the Deputy that at every point, whenever there was a change in the makeup of the consortium, there was a thorough reassessment of the capacity of the bidder to complete the project. And in many cases, the contractors that would be used, the subcontractors would be used, were identical across all the bidders. So this isn't a question of people with no experience doing it. Very largely, it was similar. And the capacity of the remaining consortium was tested, as was required by the contract, to see that they were capable of managing the process. That said, we recognise that one of the criteria for the success of a project like this, if it is adopted by government, will be the governance that is put in place by the state to itself oversee not only the contract, but many provisions in the contract that are designed to protect the taxpayer. So we recognise that we are not going to rely exclusively on, we're going to have our own governance to protect the taxpayer as well as the governance of the company itself. So we will be undertaking that work as well, which will be a double protection from the point of view of the state should it decide to proceed with this contract. So I can understand the concerns, and I know these concerns were expressed by other members in the House, and we've taken them into account throughout in my period, and I have always cross-examined what's been done to satisfy myself that concerns raised by Deputy Dooley, or indeed other deputies, that we are accommodating them and recognising them and taking them into account in the way we're managing this. And I'm satisfied that we have done that. Obviously, I will come back to the committee in due course. No matter which way it goes, I'm happy to come back to the committee when I'll be able to, I suppose, share more details with the committee.
Just, I'll bring this section to a conclusion because we could be here all day talking about it. But have you had an opportunity? Because I think the kernel of this for me, and I think most people, is to try to understand why the two biggest bidders who have the greatest assets on the ground, who are in the business, effectively Silo and Ayr. Have you tried to understand why they pulled out? And would you give any consideration to the charge that's levelled that they pulled out because they were of the view there was only £500 million on the table by the state, and they couldn't put a comprehensive business plan together that made sense, that protected the assets of their organisations, and still make a commitment to the state to roll out broadband, high-speed broadband to 542,000 homes? And if so, have you any concerns that if that was their understanding and that was the reasoning for pulling out, how it might play out now that the one remaining bidder with little or no experience, who perhaps haphazardly remained in the race, is now going to be handed £3 billion, when the two biggest players were only of the view that all was available was £500 million, and as such they pulled out, leaving all of us at a very significant disadvantage?
Well,
Before you answer that, could you maybe, to conclude on this topic, could you indicate to us, you've been charged with the responsibility to conduct a review, an analysis and an assessment of where we were, where we are now, and proposals in relation to how we move forward, and a recommendation to Cabinet in that regard. When do you expect that to be concluded? When do you expect to be in a position to make a recommendation to Cabinet in relation to the way forward?
Yeah, I'll do that as well. Just to reassure Deputy Timmy Dooley that there is no foundation, in my view, to the concept that those who were in the competition felt that there was a particular cap imposed of £500 million or £500 million on the table. Indeed, as I said earlier, at the penultimate stage, before receipt of final bids, there were two bidders submitting proposals which included their assessment of the subsidy required, and that allowed comparisons to be made. So both Granahan McCourt and one of the other bidders who subsequently pulled out had got to the point of where they were making their financial assessments of what it would cost, and I've no reason to second guess what was said by the companies as to why they withdrew. They both gave reasons in public, and I'm not going to if you like enter into a debate about why companies chose to make that decision. I suppose just to say that the 500 million that has been out there and kicked around, that was on an entirely different type of proposal, and that was from a much earlier stage, when what was being considered was covering a certain number of villages with, if you like, a hub point. It wasn't at that point, it wasn't, if you like, delivering service to every home. It was a much narrower concept that number that Deputy Dooley is talking about. The position in terms of timing is the Taoiseach has flagged in the Dáil, and it's the schedule to which I'm working on, that he would like me to be in a position to have completed and be able to make a recommendation to government by Easter. He also flagged, of course, that issues such as Brexit could, make the timing, the precise timing of that, a matter where government might schedule it depending on the what is being handled in the context of the Brexit situation. So my objective is to be in a position to bring a proposal around the Easter deadline.
Okay, and thank you, Minister. Can we move on to, before we move on from A there, could you indicate whether the Information Society activities, including the cyber security, is that negatively impacted by this revised budget?
The revised budget for cyber security? The revised budget is we've increased our budget each year. Like in 2016, I think there were only 7 or 8 people. We're now up to 30 people. So this represents, the budget for cyber has been significantly increased over the last couple of years. I don't know whether so there is no, the cyber provision is continually expanding depending on need, and no doubt the new responsibilities that are being taken on to, the 67 essential services who will be reporting, I think that will represent additional workload coming through the Cyber Security Centre, but we are undertaking an evaluation of it at this point. So that's out for public consultation, but there's no doubt, looking anywhere in the world, that there is enhanced concern about cyber security, and most administrations are investing additional resources as we are.
Okay, Programme B. We now move on to Programme B. Minister, this is referred to in our briefing document, pages 18 to 27.
Yes, so Programme B covers broadcasting. And I suppose the main things to draw your attention to here is, obviously, we have very significant support here to public service broadcasting. We have a broadcasting licence fee whose receipts in 2019 will be 227 million. RTE will receive 199 million of that to meet its public service broadcasting obligations. TG Cahir will get 36.2 million. That's in separate grant payments. It doesn't now come from the Exchequer. Part of the licence fee is allocated to the Broadcasting Fund. That's 15 million in 2019, and that supports initiatives which are open to all broadcasters, like sound and vision, essentially designed to encourage creative content from outside of the public service broadcasters, RTE and TG Cahir, and that fund, I think, has been much welcomed by the Oireachtas. The last piece to say is that there is a broadcasting bill in preparation, and we did have a discussion in the House recently. That bill will see some of the licence fee. It will introduce the possibility of new options for collecting the licence fee, which will have to be decided upon. It also will introduce the scope for some of the licence fee to be deployed to reduce the broadcasting levy on local broadcasters, and that is something I know that the committee, the members of the Oireachtas and in particular Deputy Dooley is keen to see, and that broadcasting bill, I suppose, will afford us the opportunity to debate how sums from that broadcasting fund should be deployed in support of valuable content, both local and national.
Minister, Deputy Dooley.
Yeah, thanks very much, Minister. And just on that, I mean, one of the kind of contentious issues around the licence fee has been, in the first instance, the failure rate in terms of the collection, the truancy, if you want. It's estimated to be somewhere in the region of 30 to 40 million. And there were some proposals in a document that was prepared by the joint Oireachtas committee on the future of funding of public service broadcasting that looked at putting the control of that into the hands of the revenue commissioners. And I know there were some preliminary discussions between your department and the revenue commissioners going back perhaps before your time. Maybe you could enlighten us if those discussions have concluded or if they have come to anything. And then looking at broadening the net, really to look at the consumption, if you want to use that rather crude term, the consumption of the content, because as you know, the strict definition of a television is what attracts the requirement to have a licence, but notwithstanding the movement in technology and demands, there's a lot of public service content that's now created and effectively viewed or whatever on pieces of technology, screens if you want, that don't attract a TV licence. So are there any considerations to broadening the definition to ensure that we're capturing the consumption, if you want, of the content and that it's being paid for? I'm taken to some extent that there's always a debate about the TV licence and the impact of raising or otherwise of it, but yet the extent to which people will now spend on technology, will spend on subscriptions to Netflix or various different other pay-per-view channels, whether it be through Sky or whatever. I still think the licence fee represents good value for money for what's being created, and it's often the case that it's being misrepresented, that it's just going to RT. Now, it principally does at the moment, but the independent production sector, which is really important for the maintenance of our culture and for keeping and employing people in that creative sector, do well out of the Sound and Vision Fund. Could do much better if there was more monies available to them. And you'll be aware, because we've discussed it before, Minister, is my wish, and I think it's the wish of the House actually, based on a recent private member's bill, that public service news and current affairs that's often created by the independent radio sector, that be brought under the remit or be brought under the funding model anyway of the BAI. So there's a broader space out there where we can protect and preserve the quality of that content and ensure that it's protected into the future, facing up to the challenges associated with our visitor to Dublin today, who's on his PR tour, hoping to influence, I'm sure, the legislation which you're drafting, but I hope that's, and I'm sure it will be done in an independent way without the PR spin and the lobbying that undoubtedly will be hot and heavy on your heels. So it would be useful to hear your views there on that, Minister. The TV licence in particular, rather than mine.
No, yeah, I suppose just to start on the default rate. I mean, the default rate is recorded at 14.1%. It's down from 15.3 at the end of 2013. So that represents an increase in 35,000 in the number of people from whom it has been collected. So there is some progress being made, and there's a good deal of effort to try and improve that. The working group is due to report imminently, I think, and I'm told it's not going to be far behind schedule. It was due to report the day before yesterday, but I'm told it will be shortly with me, and it is looking at whether we should be looking at alternative collection methods, be it by revenue, by tender, or instead of the present legislative requirement. I understand that will be part of the broadcasting bill, because there would have to be changes in legislation to permit either route to be travelled. In terms of how money is used, again, it surprised me, but it is legislatively set, the size of the broadcasting fund. It is 7% of the fee by legislation. So it's not, it is not something that's decided either ministerially or by the broadcasting.
Maybe that's for a very good reason.
Maybe it is. It's nor by the BAI for that matter. So it would come to the Oireachtas will have to consider whether that's something we want to change. I can see, and I fully understand the argument the Deputy is making about the importance of local radio. I think, from my own experience, it is a really important forum where you can get the time and space to discuss the issues in a less fake news environment or whatever, or are less prone to fake news. You do get the time and space to make your case. Now, there is obviously the constraint that state aid rule sets, that you can't support the operating expenses of stations under a fund of this nature, or you would be in breach of state aid. So it is for creative content. So I suppose when we come to discuss the parameters of the broadcasting bill, it will be an opportunity for us to look afresh at some of these issues.
Thank you, Minister.
Thanks very much.
Can we move on to Programme C, Energy? Minister.
Yep. Sorry, I should have mentioned Deputy Sean Canny. Minister Sean Canny is with us. He'll be taking the following two, I think. But no, Programme C. Yeah, the key elements here, I suppose, are the support to Sustainable Energy Ireland. I mean, a lot of our energy doesn't appear on the estimates. I mean, the work that we do in setting, for example, a new goal for renewable energy on our grid, or in supporting the evolution of our grid to meet ambition, be it for micro or for renewable, that isn't actually on our estimates, because it doesn't get direct support from the Exchequer, but it is part of the National Development Plan, and there's very significant investment envisaged there. What's on the estimates is more what Sustainable Energy Ireland do, and they have significant supports that I think most deputies will be aware of, the supports that are available, better energy homes, warmer homes, the deep retrofit pilot, the solar scheme, and there's certain ones aimed at the enterprise sector, like Exceed, the large industry energy network. The other one, the one that I suppose I always like to plug, because it is the most impactful in terms of carbon emission bang for our buck, is the Better Energy Communities programme. And I know Tipperary has a particular interest in that. It has been a scheme much developed in Tipperary in particular, but there's 256 of those sustainable energy communities. Some of them have gone the more deep route of having a better energy community, which is a higher level of investment, but they really are valuable schemes, and the ones that I think it should be our ambition to significantly expand in the years ahead. The other thing that's worth mentioning there is the programme provides 18.6 million to support the purchase of new electric vehicles, and I think you will have seen that there has been quite a surge in interest in the purchase of new electric vehicles since the beginning of the year. And the final piece there is to draw your attention to is 9.7 million in energy research.
Okay, on that, Minister, yeah. We're all running out of energy after our last two sessions.
Yeah, okay.
Recharge batteries now.
Thank you, Minister. Programme D, Minister Kenny, Natural Resources.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach. The aim of Programme D is to manage Ireland's mineral, hydrocarbon and other geological resources in a sustainable and productive manner. Funding under this programme allows my department to provide reliable geoscience support for environmental protection and the sustainable development of Ireland's natural resources, and to address the health and safety implications of certain historical mining sites. In 2019, funding of 2.7 million is provided for mining services, including 600,000 for mine safety and monitoring, and to develop a detailed plan to further facilitate remediation on the Avoca mine site. The programme also includes an allocation of just over 11.6 million for Geological Services Ireland services, that's GSI, including 7 million for the TELUS and Infomar mapping project. The TELUS mapping project consists of airborne geophysical measurements and ground geochemical sampling. Data from the project will allow the improvement in geological maps, new radon mapping and agricultural mineral maps, and will also facilitate better land use, planning and research. And the Infirmar project is Ireland's national seabed survey and is managed by the GSI in cooperation with the Marine Institute. And under the groundwater programme, Geological Survey Ireland's national network of turlough flood level gauges will provide key data on turlough flooding to the OPW and also to the local authorities.
Thank you, Minister.
Okay.
No questions? Okay. We move on to Programme E, Inland Fisheries. Deputy Minister Kenny.
Yeah, thank you, Carlock. And again, Programme E provides for funding of Inland Fisheries Ireland, which was responsible for the conservation, the management and regulation of Ireland's inland fishery resource. In 2019, Inland Fisheries Ireland will continue to deliver its licensing, permitting and enforcement responsibilities, along with the rehabilitation of our rivers and streams, the delivery of a wide ranging set of investments, innovations and promotions under the National Strategy for Angling Development, which will ensure that Ireland's fish stocks and angling infrastructure are protected and enhanced for both their economic value and their recreational benefit to the communities and visitors that they serve across Ireland. And the Inland Fisheries Programme includes an allocation of just under 19.9 million towards the staff costs of Inland Fisheries Ireland and the Lochs Agency. The Lochs Agency is a north-south body and is co-funded on a 50-50 basis by my department and Northern Ireland's Department of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs. Also included in the programme is 13.4 million for non-pay, current and capital expenditure by the two agencies.
Thank you, Minister. In this programme, the grant to the inland fisheries is increased by 1.4 million. I don't see any in your commentary. I don't see a breakdown of that. What is inland fisheries? What do they propose to spend the increased allocation on?
The proposed 1.398 additional allocation is made up of 665,000 for pay pensions to bridge the gap between actual pay costs in IFI and the amount the Exchequer pay has allocated. 355 is to pay for increases to staff and pensioners in the Public Service Stability Agreement 2018-2020, and 85,000 is for additional staff for the Lochs Agency, and 393 dormant account funding for two inland fishery IFI projects. And just to say, you know, one of the things that you might have seen it on the television last weekend, where we opened a disability facility down in Mayo, which I think shows the proof of what actually is happening with IFI, how they're providing accessibility for everybody, and it is a great project to see being done.
Okay, we move on to Programme F, Environment and Waste Management.
This is the whole area obviously deals with resource management, waste management, the circular economy. The big agency here is the funding of the Environment Protection Agency, 36.9 million. There is also a significant allocation for the remediation of landfill sites. And the other major item here is the Climate Action Fund, where you'll see 15 million being scheduled to be drawn down from the Climate Action Fund this year. That reflects the first allocation that we made from the fund. Significant elements in that were the public lighting initiative that's right across virtually every county in the country. There was a gas injection scheme that's looking at anaerobic digestion converted to methane. And there was the other big one was the ESB rollout of the electric charging network. So that was the first allocation. I think it was 78 million was the total allocation, but it's leveraging 300 million in terms of its overall impact. So this is a fund, you know, came from the Project 2040, the 10-year plan, where we have a 500 million fund to stimulate innovation in the climate action area, and it's had its first allocation. And the final thing maybe to draw your attention to is the 3 million there allocated to anti-dumping initiatives, which we have an active call out at the moment for communities to come forward, and we hope that 300 community projects can be supported under that.
Yeah, thanks very much, Minister. I suppose, looking at estimates generally and under various different subheads, we tend to, and I'm sure they're compiled in this way with the exception of there being some major project or some major capital investment, that they generally 5 or 10% up and down on the previous year. It's kind of the general way that things have gone. I'm not asking you to look into the crystal ball for the next set of estimates that we'll be looking at, but when it comes to this subhead F, I can only hope that in light of the report that has come from the Joint Oireachtas Committee on climate change and the work that you're doing yourself, that the next set of estimates that we look at won't be in the 5% increase ballpark of what went before. And you talk about the 500 million that's set out over 10 years. I think we're all coming to the realisation that there's going to have to be, like a seismic shift in that space. And whilst the couple of million is very welcome in terms of, your announcement yesterday, we really need to be seeing really big announcements if we're to reach the kind of targets that are needed for the deep retrofitting of homes. If we're to tackle that whole issue of trying to come into line with the transport sector and the heating sector, if we're going to have meaningful impacts there, we're really going to have to spend money. Now, I do accept, and you've said it in public yourself, that the government isn't going to be able to pay for this. The taxpayer isn't going to be able to pay for the kind of change that's needed. We get that. But it is going to take very significant financial incentives that will require you, on behalf of the taxpayer, to put your money, put your hand in the pocket of the Exchequer and put it out there. And there's no doubt that investment in this area is really beneficial in terms of addressing our climate change needs, but it will also enhance a growth in that circular economy, or I should say a growth in that green economy, which the fundamentals are, that whole circular piece. But we do need to change tack very significantly, and that will take investment, and really it takes leadership, and the only one that can do that to show confidence that that's the track we're going is for the government to do that. And I've no doubt that you know that, but it will be what this committee can do to assist you in convincing perhaps ministers in other departments that they're going to have to hold off on some of their expenditure, perhaps in the short to medium term, just to steer the ship in a different direction.
Thank you, Minister.
I think the Deputy makes a really important point as to how we're going to shift the dial. And he has acknowledged, as I've said often before, that government can't fund the level of change that we need. But a lot of the change we need is good in itself. It actually pays for itself, and it produces a better environment, a healthier environment, a more sustainable relationship with nature around us. So, yes, we will definitely have to think about how do we persuade people to make the investments necessary. I don't think it will always be upping the grant levels in all cases by any means, because I think what Sustainable Energy Ireland would tell you, and they've told me, is that they really see grants as an entry level, priming the pump initially. But what they need to design, and we need to come up with, is more self-sustaining ways of funding it, looking at ways in which we can get smart finance in, we can make it easier for people to undertake some of these investments, and they talk about behavioural economics and building out our capacities to leverage change. Clearly, regulatory change will also have a role to play, to get people to think differently. And we've already seen, like the near zero energy buildings, or the requirement, for example, that all employers with more than 20 car parking spaces will have to have electric chargers by 2025. Those sort of nudges, they don't cost the state anything. They may cost, the private sector or something, but they're key enabling technologies for the sort of changes we have to make. Carbon pricing, of course, is another element of that, because what's happening is, you know, when I drive in this morning, even though I got a plug-in electric at this stage, you're still generating carbon. I'm not paying for that carbon. So there is a case that setting a trajectory for carbon price does help people make decisions as to whether they'll choose electric or not, whether they will go for retrofit heat pumps or whatever they change. So, you know, I think there's going to be a lot of elements in the mix to bring around the sort of change, and perhaps the most important one is the one that I think, with respect to the deputies that are here now, you know, the sense that there is a broad political consensus that this needs to be done, that it's one of the challenges we face as a community, and that we need to get in behind the Citizens' Assembly as a process that in the past has leveraged significant change in our community, even things that we thought, you know, 10 years ago we wouldn't have dreamt of being possible, but we have been able to mobilise change. And the model that has been used here with the Citizens' Assembly, followed by your own work, is one that has helped us to mobilise citizen change, and I hope it can on this occasion again.
I ask you, Minister, there in relation to the Environmental Protection Agency, just an increase there of 2.1 million. What is the intended use and purpose of that additional fund? And also, is the provision for purchasing carbon credits, is that expected to continue to increase?
Yeah, on the second, we have made provision for, there is a provision in there for purchasing carbon credits. I think it's in at something like 4 million, 4.5 million. We are anticipating that we will be short, well short indeed, of the end-year target where we were to be in 2020. So even though there was a bit of a surplus early in the period 2013 to 2020, when we were below our line and therefore, if you like, earning credits, we will end up with a deficit, a significant deficit, and you know, there is provision there being made. In terms of the EPA, let me see what's the funding for that. It's a transition of the EPA non-pay costs from the Environment Fund to the vote, and increases due to EPA staff and pensioners on the Public Service Stability Agreement 2018 to 2020. So they're sort of standard enough increases coming from cost rather than additional activity levels.
Okay. Thank you, Minister. Could I, just before we move on, Deputy Ryan, before I call on Deputy Ryan, we explained to our ministers and officials that both yourself and our chairperson and Deputy Lawless were meeting with the Chief Executive of Facebook. We've moved on to Programme F, which is Environment and Waste Management, but if you wish to raise a query in relation to any of the programmes, I'll allow you to make submission.
No, I must apologise. We were at that, unfortunately. It was just the timings clashed, but I thought it was very important for our own work to attend that meeting. And I was stuck then in priority questions and transport, and I'm going to be running out the door shortly too for another engagement, unfortunately. But no disrespect to the Minister or officials, but it's just one of those days. Can I just make one broad point, if I can? I welcome the opportunity of doing it. I think our Committee on Climate Action, Deputy Dooley was a member along with 18 others, myself, I think did really good work. And I think even though there wasn't consensus on one of a couple of the issues around taxation, actually there was very widespread agreement on some of the other measures. And I think critically it does provide a good roadmap for some of how we organise ourselves in the governance of how we're going to make this leap we need to make. And I hope the government will find it useful in their drafting their National Energy Climate Action Plan, whatever it's called now. I don't know whether it's the same thing as your all things whatever plan that's due out after Easter or around Easter. But we know we have to do the National Energy Climate Action Plan under European governance rules. So I'm really keen that the government opens up that process so some of the learning we've got from the committee can allow other members of this House to kind of tease out some of the complex and difficult issues. And just last, I suppose, just to flag, I think the state and the government and this department in particular should be scaling up now for like these are revised estimates for now, but we should be looking at a completely different revised estimates next October for the following year. I mean, almost completely different department. We have to start thinking out, well, okay, we're going to be scaling back down and shutting down the exploration division, and we'll be switching some of that expertise and resources maybe to peat restoration, would be, the reorganisation of what we need to do. I think, and I've said this a number of occasions, Minister, I think the department needs to scale up. To do what we're seeking for it to do in the energy area, or indeed, this is in relation to Programme F, Chair, the environmental waste management, the environment might well include the legislation we would need in terms of offshore wind licensing, and again, to get the resources to do that, and we've got to be quick. And I know from one personal experience, is it 250 or so civil servants within the department? My fear is that's just not enough. We should be taking 300 officials from the Department of Agriculture and transferring them in, and taking 200 from the OPW and transferring them in, and building up a department of scale that is at the centre of this transformational leap we need to make. And I think your Secretary-General, Minister, and you yourself in the governance structures were suggesting in this all-of-government action plan, which you yourself have suggested, that your Secretary-General has a key role, along with the Secretary-General in Taoiseach's, to coordinate and organise this scale of a transition. And I could go on for the next half an hour on some of the governance recommendations. The case for this being the real key leap is not just your department, but pulling all the agencies with you, so that, and our regulators. We do things well in this country when everyone's on the same page, everyone understands there's a political commitment, a long-term political commitment to the scale of change we need to make. And I think we're getting close to having that now. But it requires, I've been saying all along, where's our Whittaker? We need a Whittaker today to provide the same sort of leadership that was provided then in our public service, to provide it now for the scale of change we need to make. And it's massive, and it's urgent, and it's almost agreed. It's not fully agreed, but there's a lot of agreement in our political system. So you've got a playing field in front of you, and I'd say go for it.
Thank you, Deputy Minister.
Yeah, well, first of all, just to thank Deputy Ryan and indeed the committee for the work that they've done. I acknowledge that at the very start, and I think it is right that we would have, as we've done in this case, the Citizens' Assembly, followed by the Oireachtas Committee, followed by a government plan. I think that approach is one that has helped us undertake significant change in other spheres of government. I agree with the Deputy when he says our department will need to considerably reorganise and expand its capability to take on this responsibility, and that's something that we are assessing ourselves as to what the types of expertise we need, how we need to develop that. Having said that, I think I'd also recognise that unless we get every part of government recognising that this is their responsibility, up close and personal responsibility for them, not the responsibility of a minister that happens to have climate action in his or her title. Unless we get that change, we won't deliver this. And, you're right to signal, TK Whittaker being a sort of a light bulb moment, but interestingly, there wasn't a massive institutional change that he instituted. This was a sense of conversion, of confidence, of self-belief, of starting to plan, to be ambitious, to set targets, to seek to reach them. That first paper that he produced, followed by the first economic plan, they weren't grandiose documents. And if you go back look at them now, you'll see how simple in many ways they were. But at the time, they were blindingly, they were a light shining where none had been shining for many years. And I think this is something similar. I think we mustn't sort of think that there is that we can push it over there and that's the job done. And I think your own report reflects that. The governance isn't about me or my successor reporting. The committee you envisage is holding every minister to account for their area of responsibility. And I hope that our plan will reflect that. But notwithstanding that, I accept that we need to beef up our capability. I think I was involved in the Action Plan for Jobs process when we initiated that. The first thing, one of the early things we did was we brought in the capability of Forfos into the department, so we had capability to drive and initiate change, to interact with wider parts of government. And I think it will be the same here. We need to develop that sort of capability.
One just had variation. I'll run out the door. So maybe we should take a couple of hundred people out of PER as well, just to keep everyone on board and manage them very closely.
You might say that. I couldn't possibly comment.
The Secretary General of the Department says that could be career altering.
Or very brave, as someone had said in Westminster once.
Just before I hand over to the Chairperson, Minister, I was asking Minister Canny earlier, what is the position in relation to solar energy and the setting of tariffs? I'm just going on my own constituency in Tipperary. We have a big number of solar farms that have gone through the planning process, that have expended significant funds in acquiring planning permission, and none of them have progressed. And at a time when we're promoting renewable energy, people are very frustrated and annoyed with the delay. Obviously, people can make further investment. Companies and groups cannot make further investment until they know exactly what the return they're going to get is. So what's the status of that at the moment?
Yeah, the position is, and maybe Michael will correct me if I'm wrong, but firstly there are two processes through which solar energy can evolve. One is the Renewable Energy Support Scheme, which is the successor to these refits, and we are now working intensively to develop the capacity to have an auction for that, to be scheduled for about the end of this year. And that will be a technology neutral auction, so whether it be solar or wind, whatever, can come in and bid on a level playing pitch for access to the grid. The second piece is the development of microgeneration, which again has been the subject of discussion in the House, where we are obliged to create a microgeneration framework under EU legislation by the middle of 2021 at the latest. Again, we are intensively looking at what it will take to create a microgeneration network. It does throw up some tricky enough issues around pricing, around standing charges and so on, which we have to work through. But we are determined that microgeneration should be part of a mix. I think it's really important that we encourage people to look at their own energy use and seek to replace what they're doing with renewables, and in some instances obviously they will have surplus to sell to the grid, and that represents the scope for a price for that microgeneration. So those are the two channels through which this is working. We hope that in the course of, there will be obviously a significant part of our own plan, but we also hope that we will be able to develop those. We will, it has a number of levers available under the RES scheme to prevent any one technology dominating the whole pie, if you like. So there is the capacity for making sure that while it's technology neutral, one technology doesn't scoop the pool.
My point my concern was that technology neutral, but not the lowest price, because that's important. Because there's nascent technology out there, and if we're to try to become an industry leader, or if we're to have some capacity to get ahead of the rest, it's really important that we, at this early stage, try to get some advantage, if you want, in the offshore space. Now, I accept that that's 8 to 10 years out. But if we look at what has happened over the last 10 years, and I'm not being politically critical here, very little in terms of changing or turning that dial. There really is the capacity to turn the dial if we can capture the offshore wind capability that we know is there. But it would be a terrible loss if we failed to take advantage of the opportunity, not just in capturing the energy, but in capturing the investment associated with the potential run-off jobs that would come from that. So that's not going to happen, I suspect, by just getting lucky from an auction. I think we'll have to develop a clear policy ourselves that's perhaps separate to the alternative energy piece, or to the renewable energy piece, and sees, that it brings the Department of Enterprise, Trade and Employment with it as well, that sees an opportunity, that we put in place the supports, and that it's more than just meeting our demands for renewable energy, that we see a capacity to grow and develop an actual industry here. And there's real opportunity there when you look at the kind of time frame that it's now within the space. We've seen that happen with the solar technology, with the advent of what was manufactured in China and the dropping in cost of the solar cells, PV cells. They've really come down in price. Same's going to happen with offshore wind as soon as companies reach that critical mass of orders, etc. So there's a great opportunity there, but we have to have the appropriate policy to make it happen.
Just to confirm that we will seek to have a roadmap for offshore wind to come on board. It does, as Deputy Ryan said, we need to upgrade the Foreshore Act, and the Taoiseach is taking a particular interest in driving that forward. There's a cross-government team working on that. I think we also recognise that offshore wind could be lumpy in terms of the units, so we'll have to look at it differently from just, as you say, a technology neutral, because we do need to recognise it's very early. It's very early, and we've very significant capacity. The one thing that I was very pleased to going back to my old haunts, I was out in Enterprise Ireland recently, where they had an offshore network of Irish companies who have formed into a network, and they are now already selling their capability into the UK offshore, but they are a nascent sort of capability that, all going well, we will see the development of their expertise and the scaling up of their operations.
Good. We move on to Programme G, Appropriations and Aid.
That's simply, these are the income receipts of my department. The vast majority relate to the TV licence, 227, as I said. The balance is comprised of mining and petroleum income amounting to 8.8 million, and some 4.3 million in pension levy and pension contributions, and some 2.5 million in other miscellaneous.
I might move on to the Environment Fund.
Yeah, that was established by the Waste Management Fund in 2001. In excess of 830 million has been raised by the fund through the plastic bag levy and the landfill levy. As these environmental levies achieve their objectives in reducing usage of plastic bags and tonnage of waste going to landfill, revenue to the fund has fallen in recent years. The number of leviable plastic bags has fallen from 328 per person prior to the introduction of the levy to 7 per person per annum by 2017. The decline in the landfill levy has accelerated following the opening of the Dublin Waste to Energy facility at Poolbeg. So that does demonstrate the effectiveness of the scheme.
Thank you, Minister. And if that concludes our questioning, I'd just like to thank the Minister and both Ministers and your officials for assisting the committee with our consideration of the further revised estimates. So as we have now completed our consideration of the further revised estimate for vote 29, the Clerk will send a message to that effect to the Clerk of the Dáil in accordance with Standing Order 90. Under Standing Order 89.2, the message is deemed to be the report of the committee. The meeting is now adjourned. Thank you.
Can I just, to thank Michael Manley, Matt Collins, Finola Rossi, Robert Egan and Jim Whelan, and of course yours truly, Sean Canny, for supporting the presentation of these estimates. And to thank Michael for chairing it in your absence, but thank you for the work that you did in putting together the Climate Action Plan, which I acknowledged at the start of our discussion.
Thank you very much, Minister, and my apologies. I think Deputy Lowry explained my absence here, and thank you all officials and both ministers for attending. So the meeting is now adjourned. Thank you.